Welcome to the Aging Together podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Pooja Ashok Patel, an occupational therapist, board-certified in gerontology with additional specialty certifications in dementia, fall prevention, and geriatric care. In this podcast, I interview guests who are experts in their fields and caregivers who share their lived experiences. Let's meet today's guest. Emily Clark is a life coach, a RYT-500 Yoga Instructor, meditation instructor, and the founder of Abundant Wellness with Emily. Being a former speech-language pathologist in the healthcare industry, it was from her own struggles with pouring her heart and soul into her career, being a mom and a wife, and feeling the pressure of always having to deliver results that she started her journey to radiant living. Through studying yoga philosophy, meditation, Western healing modalities, and the law of attraction, she was able to turn her life from dis-ease to reconnecting to her authentic self and bringing back her zest for life. Hi, Emily. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Pooja. Thank you so much for having me on your show. And I am so excited to share with you some things that I'm very passionate about with your listeners, especially being a healthcare provider and then sharing what it's like to be on the other side as a healthcare provider.
Absolutely. I always enjoy having conversations with other fellow rehab providers. So why don't we start there? Can you share a little bit about your background and what initially drew you to the field that you ended up practicing in?
So I am a speech pathologist, speech-language pathologist by degree, and I originally got into speech pathology because I thought I was going to work with the deaf and hard of hearing. However, when I started interning in skilled nursing facilities and when I got my first job, I started in education, but then I took on like a casual position at a SNF or a skilled nursing facility and realized I liked it so much more than working with children. And so I really dove into the geriatric and healthcare population. And my favorite that I've been a part of was actually home health care. It's very much growing. It's high in demand, but it's all very demanding but rewarding at the same time. And I loved the challenge, the diversity, and the deep purpose that home health had for me as a speech pathologist.
That's great. I share similar sentiments. I went into occupational therapy thinking I wanted to work with children. And then after a few like labs and rotations, I found that I absolutely loved working with the older adult population. And so I also made that switch.
We all make that switch. We all start like college or grad school thinking it's one population and then we switch to the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you describe a typical day for you as a home health speech pathologist? And kind of along with that, what misconceptions do you find that people often have about working in home health or especially working as a home health speech pathologist?
Yeah, so a typical day for me being a home health speech pathologist, I don't have the volume that, say, you would see in a hospital setting, an outpatient setting, or even a skilled nursing setting, because there's so much drive time in between. And so you really have to be really great at planning and organization when you're in home health, because you plan your day to get the most out of your mileage. So I would always plan my day like in a circle. I'd start my first patient as close to home as possible, drive my circle, and I'd try to end my day as close to home as possible. So a little tip out there, if anybody's looking into home health, make your circle. But as a speech pathologist, there's this big, whenever I'd walk into a home, people are like, well, I can talk fine. I don't need a speech therapist. We are so much more than speech. We are so much more than language. We are so much more than voice. Speech pathologists also work with cognition, like memory, decision-making, organization. That was a big part of my job as a speech pathologist in home health. We work with that umbrella of dementia, as I'm sure many of your guests have spoken about on your podcast. But then also what people don't understand is we also work with swallowing disorders, dysphagia. And Also, augmentative and alternative communication. So if you think about Stephen Hawking, who used his device to speak, I would often set that up for my home health patients to have an in-home AAC consultation, and then also helping them set up the device, how to use their device in everyday life.
Yeah, I think we, as rehab professionals in general, do a very poor job of advertising everything we do. And so people
Yes.
often, I mean, yes, for speech therapy, I always hear, well, I can talk. Or for occupational therapy, it's always like, I don't need a job. And it's like,
Yeah, I don't need
well,
a job. I'm retired.
yeah, exactly. You mentioned that you found it extremely rewarding to be a home health speech therapist. What aspects of that work did you find the most rewarding?
I could really help people and my patients and their families stay at home and independent in their home for as long as possible. And really, that's where a person wants to be. They want to be in their own home for as long as possible, for as long as it's safe. And that's what I really loved. And I found that compared to, like, say, working in a skilled nursing facility or home health, for me, if I was to measure, I always felt that my home health patients recovered faster when they were at home. Because if you think about it, you have your own bed, you have your own recliner, you're eating your own food, you're watching your own TV, you have your pets if you have pets. It's all the comforts of home that really helps someone recover faster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also just the comfort of being home, right? Like it's your
Hmm.
own space. You can do kind of whatever you want to. You don't have to ask for permission every time you want to get up.
Yes, yes.
Our topic today is about how we as healthcare providers experience burnout and how important it is for us to take care of ourselves too. At what point did you realize you were experiencing burnout? What were the signs? And what were some of the most challenging aspects of your job that contributed to it?
You know what? Looking back, there were a lot of little signs that I ignored, that I just didn't see. And some of those little signs were feeling frustrated. Some of the little signs, again, were like I started to feel anxious a lot during the day. And, always having the feeling to be on, to be productive. And it really just kind of snowballed into all of a sudden, I wasn't sleeping during the night. I'd have to come home and have a glass of wine to take the edge off of the day every day that I worked. I was short with my family. And it really kind of looked a lot like high functioning depression. So I was productive. I was able to get out of bed and go to work. I was killing it at my job. I was doing a great job. I was seeing all these patients. I was getting great results for my patients, but I really lacked joy. I couldn't find happiness. I felt I could never take a day off because too many people needed me. And if I took a day off, oh my gosh, it's so much work because I have to plan it out this many weeks in advance. I have to find coverage. It's just easier if I work instead of taking a day off. Like I looked great on the outside. I looked so professional. My life looked perfect, but on the inside, I was really starting to crumble.
Yeah, I think that's a feeling a lot of us can probably relate to when you've been in the field long enough, especially if you've been in one specific setting for a long time. I think I've only worked in the hospitals primarily. And, I feel like we were talking about burnout a lot during the pandemic and like after the pandemic because it just like hit us really hard, right? But I don't know that we talk about it enough outside of that, like outside of going through something as traumatic as a global pandemic, right? Like there's still burnout even after now, like all these years have passed and we're getting back to what it used to be like. And it's like, you can still burn out. And I really relate to what you said about that high functioning depression. I don't think we as professionals really think too much into it because we're like, oh, we're fine, we're good. Like, we're just going to keep going because we can do our job, even if we
It's
know.
part of the job. I can do this. It's part of the
Right,
job.
right. But not sleeping and being anxious all day is not part of the job, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And another thing with home health, you're by yourself. Like you meet with your colleagues maybe once a week for case conferencing, but otherwise you're by yourself. You're out there
yeah.
as an individual.
So you're kind of lacking that social aspect too, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
primarily only socializing with your patients and their families.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so you also kind of take on a lot of their energy. And so if you have a visit that's really high stress, high demand, the great part about it is I would have the car ride to the next patient so I could kind of decompress, but really to talk about like what went on, maybe get some ideas from someone else. I almost always had to wait until that next week at case conferencing to bring it up. So that's it could be 7 days that you'd sit and stew on something before you could really bring it up.
Yeah, that's really hard. I can't imagine if I had to wait that long. I mean, I was just so used to like just walking into the office after a patient, and if there were any therapist around, a PT or an OT, and be like, "Hey, I just had this patient. Like, what do you think?" Right? And it was like almost instant, and then you move on. And I can see where if I had to wait, like I would just sit there and just stew on it for a long time, and that can really get to you. I think there's also that aspect of that secondhand trauma that we don't talk about enough as well either, right? Like we're taking on all of these patients and family situations and stories and their home environments and trying to help them navigate that all, but you're also feeling that secondhand emotional trauma of having to take on that burden for them and trying to help them navigate some of that, right? And we don't do enough of a job. I think on one side, if you're good at compartmentalizing, it's great, but most people aren't, right? And so that's where I think I struggled the most with that emotional burden of like, oh my God, I feel so bad for this patient, or I feel so bad that I can't help this family, or hey, I really need to try and fix this. And it's like, well, we can't always fix everything, right?
Yeah. That's a hard part of the job is because in any healthcare profession is you want to help people as much as possible, but sometimes you have to accept that you can't help them.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember every hospice conversation I've ever had and I didn't do it as often as the nurses did. Certainly didn't do it as often as a physician or a nurse practitioner or physician's assistant might, but I still remember those conversations and they're difficult. And you do carry it with you no matter how much counseling or coaching or, yoga or vacations you take, you still remember those conversations. They're tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned that it was impacting you in professional and personal lens, right? You said you were becoming short with your family, and then that anxiety too. So, more specifically, how did the burnout impact both aspects of your life there?
So professionally, I looked like I was just killing it. Like I looked so successful. I could see so many patients, but there was a lot of anxiety seeing all those patients in one day. And I had to have my day perfectly planned. And if somebody went 15 minutes over, the rest of my day was off. And then be freaking out because I had a daughter in daycare and I had to pick her up at the exact time from daycare. That was my job as mom, was to pick her up at a certain time. And so many times I missed that time and I would be late picking her up. And then that would eat me at all day. It would eat me at night. And then at home, like I said, I was short with my family. I'd need to have a glass of wine to take the edge off of the day. And then would wake up frequently throughout the night panicking like did I submit my paperwork? Did I sync at the end of the day? Because we were supposed to have our paperwork submitted by midnight. And it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Did I sync? Oh no. And I'd have to get up and check. Did I write this note? Did I write in the caregiver coordination notebook at whatever assisted living facility? Like you have all these little worries that would somehow wake me up at night. And it'd be fine, but I couldn't get them out of my head.
Yeah. And it's like they add up throughout the day too, right? So if there's something from the first one, then that adds to the second one and adds to the third one. By the time you're done with your day, you have like 10, 15 things that you needed to make sure you did. And even if you did it, you're anxious about potentially missing something.
Yep. And they all might be little things to someone else, but all those little things really add up throughout the day.
Yeah, definitely. What steps did you take to then manage or mitigate that burnout once you identified it before deciding to leave bedside care?
So there were a few things that I did. One of them was I had to be okay with stepping away because there's always that guilt that if you take a day off, who's going to care for your patients? If you take a day off, are you adding more to someone else's caseload and they have to work a longer day? So I had to be okay with taking that day off and walking away. And that also meant not having my work phone anywhere near me so I could take phone calls. That's another thing is, you take phone calls all day, almost every day, and it gets exhausting. Throughout the day, I had to make sure that I could plan to take a lunch break. Like that's something people take for granted. And my mom to this day, well, why don't you call me on your lunch break? And I go, who gets a lunch break? Who gets a lunch break? But I had to be adamant that I was going to take at least 20 minutes, sit down and eat, maybe close my eyes and breathe for a little bit, and then I could go back to work. I also had to really come to terms with I couldn't do it all, both professionally and personally, that I couldn't do it all. And I had to start setting some boundaries and saying no to things that weren't working.
And so you started doing all of that. And then at what point were you like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore?
So when I left, it was because I had my second baby and I had her very early. I had a condition, I had a placenta abruption, and then I was in a condition called DIC, where, for those listeners that don't know what that is, that's where you've lost so much blood that your blood can't clot anymore. So had a few transfusions and I was very weak, and they didn't approve my leave. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how many hours I put in, they didn't approve my leave. And I just thought, you know what? If I've put in all this time and all this care caring for someone else, and I can't care for myself and my newborn NICU baby at this time, then I have to be done. I have to stand up for myself and my values.
Yeah. It's awful employer practices too, right? I mean, it's your one story, and I've heard multiple accounts of these stories, right? And I think that's where I don't think non healthcare workers necessarily understand the barriers in place from the employer side of things, where we don't really get to take that time to take care of ourselves.
I agree. And we too have toxic work environments.
Yeah.
We also have toxic bosses. We have that too. And then we have to care for you on top of all of it.
Yeah. I remember part of my I'm done situation was more like during the pandemic, but I like waited out until after the pandemic was kind of neutralized. But, we were there, dressed head to toe, covered head to toe inside of these sterile environments, trying to take care of these patients to the best of our abilities and trying not to get sick so that we don't get our families sick. And I'd have patients who, one, would completely be rude and disrespectful, or there were patients who'd be like, well, you signed up for this. And it was one of those things where it was like, I signed up to help people in a healing environment. I didn't sign up to be thrown to go to bat in a situation and an environment where nobody knew what they were doing and where we weren't being given the care or support that we needed, right? Like, yes, we signed up to help you, but not under these circumstances.
Yes. I've heard a lot of stories like that too.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that there's more of us talking out about it now, because I think it really helps the general public understand, like, just because we signed up to help with something or we signed up for a career doesn't mean that we should lose ourselves in fulfilling that job, right?
Yep. Lose yourself in service.
That's a good term. So, how did your decision to leave bedside care affect your mental and emotional well-being, I guess, initially, and then maybe like a few months out once you had time to like process everything?
So initially, because I had a baby, I felt like I had a bigger calling besides my career, and I did, but to this day, I still feel guilt that I left my patients. I left my coworkers. We had been through so much, like, we were through the pandemic, and then after the pandemic, and there's all the changes to Medicare and all kinds of changes to Medicaid and health insurance, and part of me still feels guilty about leaving them behind, but I also had to do what was best for myself and my family. I certainly sleep better at night, not worrying about whether or not I submitted my paperwork at night. Is my day planned out? What am I going to do if this patient cancels? Can I put someone else here? Am I meeting my productivity? There's a lot of freedom for me now that I've left.
We talked a little bit about this issue of the employer side of things, right? And how it feeds burnout. What role do you believe that our systemic issues in the healthcare industry play in provider burnout? And how can healthcare providers advocate for themselves and seek support within the workplace?
This is a hard question to answer because I think there's so many facets that lead to burnout in general, especially from your employer. I don't think the general public really realizes that there are a lot of healthcare companies that are owned by like a venture capitalist, that are owned by stockholders or investors. And so they want to see profit.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you and I don't work for free, Pooja. We need to be paid. So we need to make a profit.
Yes.
And our employer needs to make a profit. We need to be paid. The office workers need to be paid. We need to pay for our software. We need to pay for benefits. There's no arguing with that. However, where does the we need to be all out for profit end? I know that there are some companies out there that will give middle and upper management some really great bonuses, and the direct patient care providers aren't given those same bonuses, and we're the ones who are the ones providing the care and billing the insurance or billing Medicare to make that profit. So that's one of my little pet peeves, or it just burns my chaps, maybe I could say. Also, that we take pay cuts too. I mean, I don't know anybody in healthcare who hasn't taken a pay cut, whether it's your actual salary or hourly wage, a cut in benefits. We take pay cuts too. And, talking about the culture, a company I worked for always used to say, well, you care for our patients. And I kind of ate that up like, oh, yeah, I care for my patients. It's like they almost used marketing on me to make me work harder. And then I did. And then I burned out because no one could care for my patients the way I did.
Yeah, they make you feel responsible individually versus
Yes.
being responsible as a company to care for the patients.
Yes, that's exactly it. And yes, I care for my patients. I care deeply.
Yeah.
But I also have to care for myself.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, thankfully, I don't think this applies as much within the hospital because we really share our patients and they're in and out so quickly that it's not always individualized to the provider. But sometimes, I worked in the general medicine unit. And so sometimes we'd have patients who end up being there for a few weeks, a couple months, and then you end up building these really strong relationships. And we would intentionally figure out how to take turns seeing the patients so that none of us like individually, one, got attached, but two, felt solely responsible for that one patient. Right. Because yes, there's weekends, there's holidays, there's time off, there's vacations, right? We're a young department. We had weddings and stuff. And so we tried, that was something we were really good about as a team, trying to make sure that we evened out the caseload a little bit.
That is such a great work strategy. And yeah, trying to keep things as even as possible. Like in speech pathology, it seems like you either have your caseload numbers are really high or they're really low. There's never this happy medium, it seems like. And so that's always a struggle with speech pathologists, unless you work in the schools where it always seems to be high. But in healthcare, it's either you have a high number or you have a low number, and there's rarely that in between.
Yeah. What do you think as far as like what changes are needed in the system that we've built and created that would better support us as providers so we're not burning out the very limited workforce that we already have?
Oh, there is such a number of things. Like patient-provider relationship and rapport should be at the top. That, it shouldn't be all about billing and reimbursement or regulations, but patient-provider relationship and rapport should be at the top. And as a provider, I want to know what my patients' wishes are. What are they willing to do? What are they not willing to do? And making sure that their individual wants and needs are met. That's most important to me. I can educate them on what their options are. I can, let them know so many different things, but really I want them to take the lead and advocate for themselves so that they are in a way responsible for their care. And that really gives them some ownership of their care, and it motivates them. Regulations, there's a purpose for them, but sometimes there's overstep. Now for patient safety, yeah, that's a big deal. However, as a speech pathologist, I do not feel qualified to do things like medication reconciliation or wound assessment. I'm not a nurse. I can certainly help patients set up reminders so that they remember to take their medications. I can have them fill up a pill box with beads so they practice filling up their own pill box. But asking them what drug interactions there are, I don't even know those things. I usually had to Google it or ask a nurse. But yet somehow I was responsible for doing that at every single home health visit. And I didn't feel that it was within my scope of practice. I can certainly call a physician and say, hey, I think this patient has been sitting for a long time and has a pressure ulcer. Can I have a nurse come out and do an assessment?
Yeah. For those listening who have never worked in home health or aren't really familiar with it, there are quite a few home health mandates that require providers to fill out certain sections of assessments. And so, Emily, I think what you're referring to is those specific assessments that are required at every visit, correct?
That are required at every visit. So I would have to assess pain. I would have to assess if they had wounds. Medication reconciliation was another one, another big one. What was their homebound status? That I could do. But there are some things that I felt were so outside of my scope of practice that I did not feel qualified for nor comfortable completing, but yet somehow did it.
Right. And not to confuse that with it not being important, right? Like all of those things are important, but they need to be assessed by the appropriate provider.
Yes, they're very important. Medication safety is very important. However, I don't know all the drug interactions for every single medication, and some of our patients take 20 different medications and supplements. I'm not qualified. I don't know that.
Yeah. What advice would you give to current healthcare providers who might be feeling like maybe the early signs of burnout? And I know we talked about how you might not realize that it's burnout with those early signs, right? But maybe a little bit about, paying attention to those early signs. But then once you decide, yes, I'm burning out, what do we do?
First of all, it's okay to ask for help. I had to ask for help, and it's okay. You do not have to be such a go-giver that you give, and always give from an empty cup. So maybe you talk to a supervisor if you trust your supervisor. Maybe you take some days off and really just separate yourself from your job and from the career. Maybe you need to seek more professional help and really talk with someone, whether that's a therapist, a life coach, whomever you feel comfortable with talking to, seek out someone who can help you. And also really asking yourself the question too, is this just burnout or am I ready to be done?
Yeah, those are good points. How do you feel your perspective on patient care and empathy have evolved since leaving bedside care?
I really still have an admiration for those who can get up and go do it every day. When I was in the hospital and I would go back and forth to see my daughter when she was in the NICU, I had such admiration for the doctors, the nurses, the respiratory therapist, the OT she saw. I was very thankful for all of them because they do have a unique gift and talent in each of their disciplines, and they also have a heart for helping. And that's at the core of healthcare, is having that heart for helping.
Yeah. Moving away from what we can do within the systemic health system, because as much as we love to talk about it, there's very little we're probably going to change from the big
Mhm.
overarching health system. How can care consumers better support and empathize with their healthcare providers? I feel, we touched on it a little bit with this like misbranding or misunderstanding that, hey, we signed up for this, so we should be catering to
Mhm.
every single situation and need and whatnot, and putting up with disrespect and rude behavior and all these things. What can care consumers do and understand to better support us?
Oh my goodness, this is great. Understand that we are people too. Understand that we also have bad days. We also raise teenage children, and we also maybe care for aging parents. We may have had a major life change. Maybe it's having a baby. Maybe your favorite pet died. We're people too. We go through pain, and we hurt too. We hurt to give you bad news. It's not something we enjoy doing. We have to be honest, and it's a part of the process, yes. But when you're given a diagnosis or a poor treatment outcome, we hurt with you, but we also have to go back to work. So maybe the person we saw before you, it wasn't the best session. It wasn't the best therapy treatment. We weren't giving the best news. But we also have to compartmentalize and give our best for you too. And we're doing that to the best of our abilities.
Yeah. It's that, we talked about it a little earlier, but that compassion fatigue. I mean, yes, we
Mhm.
can compartmentalize it as we walk in from room to room, or in your case, from house to house. It's like, okay, yeah, I had 10 minutes to process this, and now I have to shove it in the back of my mind and move on with my day. Right. And then you get home and you're sitting there, and all of that is coming back to you. Right. You're like, oh, this happened with my first patient. This patient then thought I was upset, and then this patient was rude, and you're like starting to bring all that, and then that just sits there.
Yeah, and one of my favorite TV shows from the past, blast from the past here, Scrubs. If you remember that show, there's a line where Dr. Cox says, "You see that man? You see that doctor there? He's giving that family the worst message of their life, that their loved one died and that there's nothing that he could have done, and he's very sorry. Nobody in that family is going to go back to work today. But that doctor, he's going to turn around and go back to work." And that they hit the nail on the head of what it's like some days is you
Mm-hmm.
give somebody devastating news. And yes, that patient, their family, they're not going to go back to work. They're going to have time to process it. But we turn around and we go back to work, and we have to care for the next person and the next person.
And sometimes it's not even just about delivering the news. A lot of times it's a patient you've been working with for a long time and they pass away. That happens. I mean, it happened a ton in the hospital. I'm sure you had a few experiences yourself with home health and these relationships that you build. And then all of a sudden they pass away. It's like losing a family member or losing a friend. And you still have to go back to work because guess what? That's not a thing. You don't skip work because a patient of yours passed away, right?
That's exactly right. And I always found it was very hard for me when I would have a patient who would transition to hospice, and then I would never find out that they had died. I might read it in the obituaries somewhere online, and then you find out that they died, and it's still hard for me.
Yeah, it is hard. Within the hospital, in that perspective, like we would have some patients who would come back often, right? We'd have the readmissions. We knew some of our patients with the chronic diseases who would come in once a month or every few weeks or like every other month. And when you've been working somewhere for 5, 6 years and you're seeing the same patients over and over again, and then all of a sudden you stop seeing their name, you just don't know what happened, but you know something happened. And I think that's
Yeah.
where we would always kind of, it would spark up a conversation in the office and like, hey, has anybody seen this patient lately? I hope they're okay. Or have you heard anything? And then maybe someone heard and said, oh yeah, we heard they passed away. And it becomes this very emotional process of like, oh, that stinks. Like we've grown to know this person over the years, right? And
Yeah, and you lost a friend,
yeah,
and it's a different kind of goodbye when whether you attend a wake or a funeral, that's a formal goodbye, but when you're in healthcare, you really don't have that. You just kind of find out, and it's like, "Oh, okay."
yeah. And I mean, you said it already, but it's like humanizing that, right? Like we're humans too. We care too.
Mhm.
Just because it's our job doesn't mean that we don't care if somebody gets hurt or somebody passes away. Like it still bothers us.
Yes, and in home health, when we'd have a patient be rehospitalized while they were on our services, you just feel awful. I mean, you wonder, could I have done this differently? Could we as a team have done this differently? Could we have told a family member this maybe? But ultimately, you do also have to accept that you can't stop every situation from happening. You can't stop every fall. You can't stop every infection. And we also kind of live in a society that doesn't think about our mortality, and there is always an end.
Yeah. Do you have any specific experiences or stories where you got that empathy from any of your patients or families? Like, I've had a couple situations where, a family member or a patient would be like, thank you for everything you've been doing. We know you guys work really hard, and we're just grateful that you had time to come stop by. Or, just like simple messages.
Yes, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. People are like, I know it's got to be really scary. You're going from house to house. We don't know what this is. I know you're doing the best you can to protect us from COVID-19, but thank you for doing what you do. Home health, you sometimes have those little old ladies that love to bake cookies, so you get cookies or you get treats. That was always kind of fun. Oh, thank you so
Yeah.
much. And every once in a while we would get like a thank you note from a family.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to understand that those little things, those little words, the little moments, like they really do sometimes make or break our day, right? Like
Oh,
if
they
you're
do.
having a very bad day and someone just takes the time to thank you and show their gratitude, it can completely turn your day around.
Absolutely. And it might seem so little to you to throw a thank you note into the mail, but it means the world to us.
Yeah. How, other than, a few of us taking to social media to express like, hey, you need to be patient with us. We're trying our best, you know?
Yeah.
How do care consumers become more aware of kind of the pressures and challenges that are faced by their healthcare providers? You know, I don't know if you're aware of any, but if there's any initiatives or programs that you think can like help bridge that gap between care providers and the care consumers.
I don't know if there's any initiatives, but really maybe talk to a neighbor. That we are in the general public. We're regular people just like you are. And, take some time to talk to us about what it's like, what the struggles are. And yeah, we do our best not to dump on other people, but I don't think people realize that we have productivity measures that we have to keep up with. Like when I tell people that, their jaw drops to the ground. Like, you have to see so many people in a day? Yeah, that's part of my job, and it's a very important part of my job. Or like a prior authorization for insurance, we have to fill that on top of your evaluation and the treatment that we provided. And that's technically, like, in some systems, it's not paid time. So you volunteer that time to make sure that you don't see a payment. Just talk to your neighbor, talk to another healthcare provider, see what it's really like, and ask for their honesty.
Yeah, just talk to your providers, right?
Maybe not in an office visit.
Right, right. Not
But if you
during
have
a
any
treatment
family
session.
members or friends, just talk to us about what it's like. We struggle too.
I almost feel like it's more common knowledge when you speak with like friends or family who work in corporate America in like finance or sales or marketing, and they have to meet certain metrics and stuff too, right? And so people know like, oh, they're stressed because they have to meet X, Y, and Z metric by end of month or end of quarter or whatever it is. But part of me is also like, well, they get paid well to meet those
Yes,
metrics,
they do.
right? We have to meet these often unattainable metrics, and we definitely don't get paid the price for it. And on top of that, like you mentioned earlier, we take those pay cuts. You miss out on bonuses. You end up like working more than you're supposed to because there's a lot of
Mhm.
things we have to do that are unpaid for, right?
That are required, but not part of being paid.
Yes. So, like, for the listeners, like, as healthcare providers, if you're billing insurance, in most cases, you only get paid for direct treatment. So, when you are directly working with a patient or family member. So, any other time, whether that's like looking up information, researching, writing up an evaluation, or writing up the treatment note, or putting together resources for you, all of that stuff is untimed work, unbillable work. So, we can't bill your insurance company to say, like, hey, we spent X amount of time doing research and putting together resources for this patient. Can you pay me for it? They're not going to pay us for it. So, all of that extra time adds into our day. So, yes, while we might have 7 hours of direct patient care scheduled for the day, and it looks like we have 35 hours of actual work, well, those other 5 hours don't necessarily make up the time that it might take us to write documentation and do research for 35 patient appointments, right?
Or calling a family member and educating them on like a diet recommendation or how somebody did in treatment that day if you work in a hospital or an outpatient setting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconception around how our healthcare system works, and unless you've been through it yourself as a consumer or you work in it, you really don't see all the lows of it.
Absolutely.
So tell me what you've been up to now since then, right? You kind of went into an alternative career path role since leaving the field, and how has that impacted your view on healthcare?
Yeah, so I started Abundant Wellness with Emily. I also am a yoga instructor. So I started that as kind of a fun side hobby. And as part of my training, I had to do life coaching. And at the time of the training, I'm like, I want nothing to do with life coaching. Like, I have a real job. I don't need to do this. But I found that the more I was teaching yoga and having some private clients, I ended up attracting a lot of other healthcare providers that were looking to yoga for stress relief. And then ultimately, that life coaching certificate came in handy because they would bring their stress and their frustration and how they felt so stuck. And I was able to use a lot of these life coaching skills and strategies that I learned to help them through that. And so I have been a life coach to other healthcare providers who are experiencing burnout, who are looking to create more ease and honestly to feel confident again, because for the past 5 years, we have been through so much and we have not rebounded. We really haven't rebounded. And I don't know if we ever will, to be very honest, but there are things that we can do as an individual to really take back our life, maybe take back our career, and just to feel good about ourselves again.
I think it's really hard trying to switch careers. So, for example, I had a really hard time leaving my job when I was leaving full time. And a big part of that OT to speech, like we talk a lot about like your cognitive distortions, right? Like we just like create these like stories in our head that we're like, oh, if I do this, this is going to happen, right? So I was so stuck in the belief that I had spent so much time undergoing the education and experience of becoming an OT that I didn't want to leave clinical care so early in my career because it would take me away from the field that I worked so hard to join. And so I felt like I couldn't leave my job because that meant I would be giving up this career that I had worked so hard for.
Giving up a title, you spent all that money on a college education,
Yes.
you have letters behind your name. When people ask you, oh, what do you do? It's such a
Right.
part of your identity.
It is. And that loss of identity, I think, was part of what I was so concerned about. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And all the opportunities I could have gone for to, advance professionally were all outside of the rehab department. And that was where I was feeling even an extra bit of like loss of identity because it was like, well, yeah, I could go into project management. I could go into quality improvement, but then it felt like I was leaving rehab.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it was one of those things where it's just like, oh, I've spent all this money, all these years. Like, I don't want to do that. And it wasn't until actually my husband, he was like, well, how much time did you spend in school? I'm like, 6 years. And he's like, how much time have you been in the field? I'm like, 6 years. He's like, it's even. He's like, you paid your
Yeah,
dues.
that's a good way to put it, isn't it?
It is. He's like, you paid your dues. Now you can figure out what you want to do next. And that was kind of
Yeah.
where I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, if I really want to stick to this belief of mine, then this is how I can think about it. And so that was really what helped me kind of be like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah, I heard a stat when I was in grad school that most speech pathologists completely burn out after 3 to 5 years. And I'm like, oh, I've done it for 15. I'm good. I'm
Oh, yeah.
good.
Oh, yeah. You definitely paid your dues there.
I'm good. I can step away.
Yeah, I think it's closer to 10 for occupational therapy practitioners, but I keep saying I think the pandemic escalated that because those 2 years were brutal. What is one takeaway you'd like the audience to consider as it relates to anything we've talked about? Provider burnout, care consumers, mutual empathy.
So I would really like to speak to providers that, you know, yes, you care for your patients, you care for your family, but above all, you also need to take care of yourself. And so that can look like taking a day off and not cleaning your house or a closet or whatever. It can be a day where you send your kids to school and daycare and you binge watch Netflix on a Wednesday. Or maybe it is you speak up and you ask for part-time rather than full-time because it's starting to wear on you. You might still love your profession, but it's wearing on you, or you want to be home more if you have small children. Nobody can advocate for you the way that you can. I always told my patients that nobody's going to speak up for you the way that you can. So also, if you're feeling that burnout, speak up, say something, ask for some help. It's perfectly okay for you to get help too.
Yeah, that's a great point. We tell our patients to advocate for themselves, but we don't do it enough for ourselves.
No,
Yeah.
we think we'll fix it all by ourselves.
If that isn't a true provider, let's fix it all.
Let me tell you how it's going to be. And then
Emily, thank you so much for taking this time and for this wonderful conversation.
Yes, you're so welcome. I'm so passionate about sharing this and helping my other peers.
Yeah, absolutely. If someone wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
You can always find me on Facebook. That's Abundant Wellness with Emily. You can find me at my website, abundantwellnesswithemily.com/home. You can find me on Instagram. Again, that is Abundant Wellness with Emily.
Awesome. Emily, thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing what our audience has to say about this.
Yes, awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to the Aging Together podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Aging Together, LLC, a caregiver coaching service with educational programming and support services for family caregivers of older adults. This episode was produced by me, Dr. Pooja Ashok Patel, in partnership with Natural Eye Media. If you found this episode of the Aging Together podcast valuable, we'd love your support in spreading the word. Please subscribe to the show. Your likes, shares, and reviews fuel our mission. Don't forget to rate and leave a review wherever you're listening. Your feedback matters. Until next time, take care.